This program is underwritten by Silterhar Ford, Lincoln, Mercury, Mazda, Volvo, Jaguar, and Aston Martin, which is proud to bring you Broomfield, Creation of a County, in honor of Broomfield's second anniversary of the transition from city to county status.
November 15, 2001, Colorado created its first new county in 98 years. What made this event unique was where it was created and the circumstances that led to its creation. Over 4 decades, the city of Broomfield grew from a tiny farming center of just 80 people located between Denver and Boulder to a bedroom community to a booming suburb of over 42,000 people with its own unique economic base and political challenges. The growth of Broomfield in many ways mirrors the growth of the West's booming suburbs in post-war America. Founded next to the original town of Broomfield, the new city of Broomfield Heights was one of them. In 1952, the Denver-Boulder Turnpike was built as a toll road between the cities of Denver and Boulder. The turnpike meant commuting to work in the city and returning home to the suburbs at night. World War II veterans had returned, taking advantage of the GI Bill and attending college. After graduation, they needed homes. The GI Bill also offered these young men and women low-cost housing to start their lives over after the war. Home builders began new housing developments to answer that need. In 1955, the first residents moved into their new homes and a new city was born.
People moved in. And everybody had dogs and kids and not much money. You didn't have to lock your door. There wasn't anything worth stealing.
Despite never having a real downtown like other communities, Broomfield residents built a shopping center and went to work starting businesses and services they needed. The families who moved to Broomfield came from all over the country to start building the schools and businesses that would be the heart of an entirely new community. They faced challenges, but these innovative new citizens found ways to meet them, at least on a temporary basis.
Jim Van Buskirk, who's a realtor out here, had a grocery store in the basement of the bank. We also had a jail down there, had one cell in the basement of the bank, and there was a barber shop down there.
Because the town was new, there wasn't any old-time set group, that controlled everything.
And I felt that we were, down here at the end of the county in the corner, and we got the leftovers. And we were paying taxes like everyone else, so why the leftovers?
We'd go around door to door, JCs and various individuals, and collect money so we could buy a night watchman. Boulder County wouldn't even send a deputy sheriff over here.
When the City of Broomfield was incorporated, first vote was 1961. And the vote to incorporate was defeated by 3 votes.
So we went through and recounted them. We threw out all the improperly marked ones. We picked up a few extra votes, but what didn't make a significant difference.
Of course, it turned out a year later that everybody turned around and was very much in favor of incorporation. And I think that helped the area almost immediately.
The end result was a very close-knit, small-town atmosphere that still exists today, despite the growth in population and newcomers from all around the nation into the community. Broomfield grew steadily throughout the 1960s and 70s, but things began accelerating in the 80s and 90s. That's when development began at Interlochen, which became the home of both established and startup high-tech companies, and even became headquarters of international corporations looking for a high-tech business campus combined with housing and recreation that would attract and keep high-caliber employees. Initially, Broomfield was located entirely in Boulder County. However, with growth of the city, that began to change. An accident of political geography put Broomfield at the periphery of Boulder, Adams, and Jefferson counties, whose borders Broomfield gradually overtook as it expanded. Later, as annexation wars developed among Denver's northern suburbs, Broomfield annexed into a 4th county, Weld, making it the only city in the nation other than New York City to be split among 4 counties. With the various county seats 10 to 50 miles away, many residents felt that the increasing share of tax dollars Broomfield was generating weren't being returned to their community, especially since no county offices or programs were located in Broomfield. On November 15, 2001, the City of Broomfield became Colorado's first new county since the City and County of Denver in 1902. It was an historic event for the state of Colorado and an opportunity for the citizens of Broomfield to come together after living as a city in 4 different counties. The fact Broomfield became the first new county since the City and County of Denver came as a surprise to the citizens of Colorado, and this is the story of how it came to be.
Broomfield being in 4 counties was an impossible situation. It was no way to run a government. It became an impossible situation for council to continually have to go to meetings, interact with all these different governmental agencies, and we were such a small part of all of them, we weren't important to any of them.
The idea really first came up, I would say, about 30 years ago.
There probably have been maybe 40 city and county consolidations in the entire United States. A secession from 4 counties, I don't believe has ever occurred.
Broomfield is the smallest full-service county in the United States. It became the smallest county in the United States, outside of an island in Hawaii.
It wasn't all of a sudden. Some of us for the last 15 years had thought that Broomfield ought to be its own county.
In Boulder County, we might have had a little bit different philosophy on a lot of different issues than that municipality. And then as we started to grow into Jefferson, Adams, and Weld County, it became even more fractured.
That created problems in terms of separating the community and causing barriers within the community.
It's crazy if I have a business in one side of Broomfield that I have to charge X amount of sales tax, and another part of Broomfield it's a different amount of sales tax.
You don't know always when you've just left a city and gone into another one, nor left a county and gone into another one.
Yeah, but after living here in Broomfield, I did get the feeling that, you know, we were always low on their list.
But it seemed that they were not getting their share of the revenue that they were generating.
We really had no clout, period. Boulder, I'm not saying they treated us real bad, but they didn't really treat us that good.
We didn't have any of the elected officials from all the 4 counties ever live in our city.
We had a picture taken one time at the Capitol, and there must have been at least 9 people, either in the Senate or the House, that represented Broomfield. That was the real problem. You didn't have anyone who actually lived there and was really focused on it.
Where we're dealing with 14 different county commissioners, 4 different district attorneys, 4 different sheriff's department.
I would have to drive to the city of Boulder to file a case, drive to the city of Brighton to file a case, and then drive all the way down to Golden to file cases. A lot of driving time, a lot of time wasted.
And so we kept asking, you know, is this the most efficient way of providing services to our citizens?
It made administration almost a nightmare.
People trust local government more than they trust the state government, certainly more than they trust the federal government. So if you really want, as an elected official, to meet the needs of your people, you want local government as close as you can get it.
For Broomfield, identifying the reasons to become a county wasn't nearly as hard as the process it would take to become one. First, there was the need to ascertain whether the community would support the idea and whether to ask statewide voters to amend the Colorado Constitution to allow a formation of Broomfield County.
About 94, 95, the connection went out and did a vision.
And I went out and had an opportunity to interview all the counties to find out what services were available to our community, how many people were being provided those services, where those services were available, and what it looked like. And what we were told unilaterally by all the county commissioners was, no matter what you're paying us, you're always getting more back in dollars returned to your community than you'll ever pay us. We asked them all to show us. Prove it.
We sent our tax dollars to Boulder, and very little of that ever came back that we could identify.
You know, our goal really was to provide services locally, make sure that we're able to find a common meeting place for our citizens, and lower taxes in our community.
We had to be self-sufficient to a great extent over the years, and so we learned how to be on our own.
There seemed to be in the community a lot of concern that people really didn't know where they were supposed to go for services.
Some of our citizens needed county services and they weren't accessing them because it was too difficult for them to get to the point in the county where those services were offered.
I was most familiar with Adams County and most of the social service facilities that were down in Commerce City, and it was very difficult for people to get down there.
People also came out and said, I think we ought to be our own county, or I wish we were all in one county. I wish we could get driver's license plates here. I wish we could get marriage licenses. The real estate is a problem.
It was hard to explain sometimes, you know, they couldn't understand it. No, you can't do that here.
And we were hearing repeatedly, our community is a little bit segmented. If you live on one side of a street, you get services that are X, Y, and Z, and if you live on another side of the street, you get ABC. And it made people feel disjointed.
I didn't realize until I got involved myself how separate, especially the Adams County side, and I think the Jefferson County people may have felt the same way, was from the Boulder County. The core of the community was really Boulder County. And to me, once you realize that that is there, it's just a chasm that I felt like we had to bridge.
I found out that the city had already tried on numerous occasions to get the counties to come in. We'd provide them with facilities, and then they could provide some staffing that they would jointly pay for to provide services here in Broomfield. And I guess there just really wasn't much interest in any extra expense. We could drive to the county seat just like everybody else does.
But they clearly understood also that Broomfield being such a small part of their community and Boulder County community, that it was tough to provide those services to us.
We kept asking, why couldn't we become our own county? At that particular point in time, we had just went through some annexations up north and annexed into the 4th county.
I thought, you know, it would make a lot more sense for us just to take everything into Boulder County. Most of the city's already there, and I talked with County Commissioner Ron Stewart, and he said he had no interest in the rest of us.
The seated council at the time decided now's the time to either try it or to drop it.
Finally, I said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe we're ahead of ourselves a little bit here. Maybe we put this on hold. And it was almost like that was the catalyst we needed to say, yes, sir, we can do this, and we're going to go after it and do it. And council was unanimous on the decision to go forward.
In a November ballot, let's just ask that advisory question, and it came back 63% for our city council to study it.
The results of the advisory vote encouraged the backers of the proposed new county, but debate began among Broomfield citizens about what that vote really meant. While some felt it was an unambiguous statement by voters to pursue the county option, others contended the language of the advisory question merely said the idea should be studied and advocated more citizen input before moving forward.
All they had a chance to do was say, we should consider it. And I voted for that measure at that time.
Well, we commissioned a study, and it must have been in late 96 or in 1997, I think.
First, at a very, very basic level, to determine, does it make any sense whatsoever?
And we had actually 3 feasibility studies done, financial feasibility studies, to try to determine if it would be financially feasible for Broomfield to do these things. And all the studies indicated that it would be if we were prudent.
We based the whole study on knowing whether or not we could afford to provide these services based on that tax base at that time.
At the time we did the analysis, we were going to have at least $1 million positive variation. And as time went by, that number has grown.
With the study complete, the Broomfield City Council was then asked to make a quick decision about how to proceed with the issue. The dilemma proved to be one of the most controversial points of the debate.
The feasibility study was completed in February of 1998, and by the end of April of 1998, it was on the state ballot without any citizen vote or even public meetings to approve that being done. I mean, it was open to the public, but there was no citizen comment allowed or permitted during that meeting.
Broomfield also faced two difficult options. One, a long, expensive ballot initiative process with little time to prepare a campaign, or an alternative fraught with political peril.
And the first task then became one of saying, well, in order to do that, we'll have to amend the state constitution. So we went about drafting an amendment to the state constitution. We went back and we looked at the amendment that was done for the city and county of Denver, which was drafted, I think, in 1900. You know, that's a starting point. So we looked at that, and it gave us some ideas.
There were two different ways of getting it on the ballot. One was to go through the legislature and have 2/3 of the House and Senate approve it for a constitutional amendment. And then the other way was to go through a referendum, which would have cost us somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000.
It worked a lot better, though, bringing it through the legislature, and Peggy Lamb is to be commended for that. That was her idea.
Actually, I represented a substantial portion of Broomfield County when I was in the House. And then I left the House, and we had looked at legislation while I was there, so I got in touch with them and said, you know, here's a really interesting, great idea that needs to happen, and it needs to happen right now.
Because we had finally made the decision that, okay, well, maybe we should go through the General Assembly rather than do the petition route. So we said, okay, we're going to do that, but we went down there towards the end of the session.
If that little conversation that I had with the guys from Broomfield had been a week later, I mean, just days later, it would have been impossible. I mean, this happened so fast, and it just, you don't have legislation that goes through the legislature very fast.
Well, the leaders of the campaign in Broomfield came to me and to Tony Gramscis, who was the representative in the House that carried the bill in the House. And then I really wanted to carry it in the Senate because I felt like I had the background and knew the people and knew what the problems were. There had already been a vote in Broomfield to see if the majority of people in Broomfield wanted this, and I thought that was a wonderful thing to do ahead of time. Made it a lot easier for me carrying the bill to say, the people in Broomfield want this.
When they had a question, they wanted to talk to the mayor and they wanted to talk to our consultants and our city manager.
I did all that on my own time, just took some vacation time and did that, so I wouldn't be doing it on city time because that would not be appropriate.
Initially, there was just some confusion, you know, why would you want a new county? We don't need one, and all those typical things, you know, just another piece of bureaucracy.
And so we really had to get it across to them how inconvenient it was for the citizens to have to go to 4 different county seats.
I think it was one of the senators said, well, are you telling me you want out of Boulder County? And we said, well, yes. Well, why don't you just say that to begin with? We understand.
It was not a terribly hard sell. But it was dramatic at times, mostly because of the time frame. It was such a short time to get this to happen.
So when you go through all of the various committees with the Senate and the House of Representatives, they obviously made changes to the draft.
One of the big objections were from the school districts that were involved.
When we went to the state, we actually wanted to become our county and our own school district.
But we ran into a snag with that because of the reaction we got from some of the school districts, as well as the law saying you can't have more than one subject in a particular bill.
And eventually that had to be amended out of the bill or it never would have passed.
Oh, and the other thing that they wanted to make sure of is that we wouldn't become a Swiss cheese county, where we have the county boundaries, but then we had a little enclave here that we didn't annex or something, and then a little area over here, a little hole here, here, and here. So we made the commitment to them that we would do our best not to have that.
The success of the process of the city and county of Broomfield really revolved around each of the 4 counties, our sister counties, Adams, Boulder, Jefferson, and Weld, not opposing us, or at least being neutral.
Because, of course, they were concerned about the tax base and the taxes that they would be losing. And I finally said to them, well, this is going to pass. So you may as well come up with your compromises and decide what you can live with. And I said, okay, then we'll meet Al in a couple of days. In the meantime, I want you all to get together and iron these things out. And to their credit, they did.
We won approval in the Senate by 1 vote. And the last vote came from the President of the Senate. Representative Grampsis was retiring from the House. He was going to run for the Senate. I was at the back of the House, and I saw the schedule for the day, and the City of Broomfield's question about becoming a county was scheduled as the last item of the day. And I was on the phone right at the beginning of the morning with Mayor Heil from Westminster, who was still pushing Broomfield to de-annex some areas and negotiate on some things. So they turned the gavel over to Tony, and Tony said, you know, thank you, I enjoyed it, all those kind of things, but immediately said, I want to bring up the first item of business for the day, and that's the City and County of Broomfield. And he got up and he said, ladies and gentlemen, I have studied this bill. I have looked at Broomfield's concerns, their problems, and their citizens' interests. It is going to benefit them to become a city and county. I encourage you this morning to not have any debate. There's no need for any further discussion. You all understand the issue. Let's vote now to support the City and County of Broomfield. Slammed down his gavel, and they started the vote. We passed by about an 80% approval rate. And to say the least, we were on cloud 9 at that time. And I think I got removed from the galley because I was screaming and yelling. I was jumping up and down and felt pretty elated, to say the least. And then I had to go back on the phone with Mayor Heil and say, Mayor, I'm sorry, it's all over. It just passed. And I hung up on her.
And it just shows you what the unanimous support of a council, a mayor, and a community can do to influence your legislators.
There really was a coming together of the community. There were people from both sides of the political environment, but really believing in Broomfield and trying to make this new product.
Because I've seen legislators become paid lobbyists for issues that they were not really particularly interested in when they were in the legislature. But here were volunteer lobbyists who had the passion for it. And that makes a whole lot of difference.
I've said this to a lot of people at the legislature, you know, if more things that happen at the legislature were more similar to what happens in places like Broomfield, we would be very lucky because there's an awful lot more that might get done, perhaps. It was like one of those times when everything kind of perfectly falls in place. It's kind of the coming together of a positive, perfect storm.
Getting through the state legislature was just one hurdle the supporters of Broomfield County had to face. Now the challenge was to make their case directly to the voters of Colorado. The leaders of the campaign were faced not only with building a campaign organization, but also educating thousands of voters statewide of Broomfield's unusual request.
I volunteered to, as a citizen, chair the committee of citizens because the city couldn't actively be involved in it. And soon after, we set up a formation of a group called Citizens for Better Local Government.
George DeCero, I believe, and a number of people decided that they really wanted a citizen involved in the management, the leadership of the committee. And so George and Larry asked me if I would serve as co-chair.
We split the responsibilities. I was the outside guy, he was the inside guy. We were a great team. Al is a former executive with large corporations, has some great organizational skills. None of us had really been involved in a statewide election. And we really didn't know what to do next.
The committee had probably 150 to 200 people in total. There were probably, I'm going to guess, 75 or 80 people really who were the focus of our activities.
We had to do a lot of fundraising. I became the primary fundraiser, fortunately or unfortunately. Some of them were as small as $10, and we had some large donations also, which really made a big difference to us.
We did not have a great deal of time, but we felt that we did the best we could with the resources that were available to us. Approximately $1,850, which is all that we raised to fight this issue.
I think our opposition was more philosophical in nature, more of an information drive. We didn't expect to defeat the initiative.
We now had the issue of informing the entire state about the issue and soliciting their support.
Our campaign manager and his staff are in Denver. made a lot of recommendations to us, took care of the marketing end of the business. Our primary spends were on mailings. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of around 250,000 homes in the state of Colorado. We actually published a newspaper and sent it out with all the reasons they should vote for the issue. We did some level of advertising, newspaper, and we did a little bit of radio, but most of the radio was talk show, trying to get involved with some of the talk show hosts.
I was hopefully optimistic about the outcome, but I had my doubts about whether or not the entire state of Colorado would vote for the city of Broomfield. In fact, there's some people that have never heard of Broomfield.
Probably the biggest challenge, just to get people to be aware of what was going on here so that they would, you know, it wasn't going to hurt them any, but that they wouldn't just vote no.
Our first survey statewide was 60-40.
They said the only thing that will cause a failure of a vote was some contentiousness, because you have the vote now.
There was a lot of apprehension amongst other governments, which was eliminated before it actually came to the vote.
One of my personal fears was that Boulder County would wake up and realize that with the Flatirons Mall and with Interlochen and those type of things, that a lot of tax dollars were going to leave their county. And I guess I was fearful of Boulder County, knowing that they would have the money to actually come up with a campaign, could actually hurt us.
If all four of the counties had strongly opposed this measure, my gut feeling is it would have never happened in the first place.
All over the state, one by one, citizens of Broomfield told their friends about it, and we were able to just pass the message.
A lot of them wanted to know how we were going to be represented, how it was going to affect the state financially, how it was going to affect other counties around us.
I think many of the people in the state felt that if people were willing to take on the burden, that it really wasn't for them to say no.
Most people, if they can help you out and it doesn't cost them anything, they don't mind doing it.
In Loveland, they have an old party rally up there with both the Democrats and the Republicans having speeches and all kinds of things going on. It's just a great campaign rhetoric. And they let us set up a booth with all the other campaigns, and we talked to hundreds of people there. We had volunteers going to football games at the Air Force and CSU and CU, giving away free hot dogs and brats to anybody that would walk by, so they would take our campaign literature.
I remember one morning standing down on University Boulevard. It was freezing cold, and you know, all bundled up, holding up a sign on University Boulevard at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I think all of us got a smattering of the Kiwanis and the Optimists and the Rotary Clubs, and you know, it was fun to go out and have people actually want to hear our story.
We're talking to them about the police issue, the fact that our officers had to go to 4 different jurisdictions. They were off the street for a number of hours every time they made an arrest. The 4 different arrest procedures certainly registered with a lot of people.
A Rocky Mountain News editorial shortly before the election, while recommending passage of the referendum, did highlight opponents' concerns about suffrage on the appointment of the sheriff, treasurer, auditor, and clerk, but said the citizens could change that if they wanted to. That editorial also indicated the city's own annexation policies were partly responsible for Broomfield's situation, that commercial interests were the primary source of funding for the amendment, and feared that the county could be approved by state voters even if Broomfield residents rejected the idea in the same election.
That could have occurred. It was a major oversight, and we could not understand why that was not done.
We were concerned, frankly, about the fact that we thought we had done a very good job statewide, but we wanted to make sure that we had done an equally good job here in Broomfield.
And originally, when we put it on as a ballot question, not all of our council believed that the citizens would support it.
We were watching the vote all night, you know, how, because it was a statewide election. How was it going? And initially, as a matter of fact, we weren't too sure. It was like, I don't know what these returns look like here.
The thing eventually passed about 61-39, 62-38. So that 60-40 held throughout the process.
I was in Europe, and I called, and Cooper answered the phone, and he said, "Hello," and I could hear everybody in the background screaming and hollering, and they were euphoric.
It was a huge celebration, and you kind of went, wow, it really worked, you know, just like you wish it would.
You know, the people chose to make Broomfield County. I think that is a good thing.
Once the statewide vote was won, Broomfield officials faced a tremendous challenge. The idea of creating a unified government structure out of 4 vastly different counties had never been tried before. Broomfield was also faced with the challenge of either becoming the kind of county they had just escaped or attempting a radically different, innovative, but untried approach.
Somewhat, in my opinion, it was a little bit, oh my gosh, we did it.
It was one of those things that said, well, now that we've done it, what are we really going to do?
They had a tremendous chore ahead of them, to say the least. They needed to find out what it meant to become a city and county.
Do we want to try to have the typical 100-year-old county government organization? Or do we want to try to do something that is unique and different?
And we had heard so many stories about, oh, if we could only do it over again. And we had that opportunity. We get to do it over again. We get to start from scratch.
Shortly after it passed, we put together our staff teams, council teams, and proceeded to try to put together an organization for a combined city and county.
One of the advantages to having a 3-year planning period is that we're able to really try to think out just exactly what type of issues we would deal with. We worked back from November 15th of 2001 back to December of 1998, and we knew exactly when we had to have different things in place, and we hit all of our targets.
There's a document called titled the Model County Charter that's put out by the National League of Cities. We looked at that, and we looked at a lot of other research. Denver, by the way, was very helpful. The staff and so forth in Denver department heads were very helpful. We also looked at some examples from the state of Virginia. Virginia has some combined city and counties, and we looked at how they were structured there.
And talking with our citizens and saying, are there programs that we haven't provided, and do we need to provide more programs? Are there programs that aren't working as efficiently?
You know, we all have our special interests and the things that concern us. But when you look at the overall plan of what we're doing, you know, you have to measure everything to see where the good and where the bad is.
There were a lot of little pieces that had to come along, some inclusive legislation that allowed us to function like a county.
You do have cleanup bills that has to be done. So we needed to bring other bills to the forefront and get them passed so that we could make sure that Broomfield was in line with the Constitution and with state law. And one of them was to put the county into a judicial district.
At the state, when the constitutional amendment was on the ballot, I think none of us sort of in the state bureaucracy thought this would happen. The one place that it got difficult was as Broomfield took funding to support our services. That, of course, always creates some consternation.
The other counties were saying, where's the money coming from? Well, you just have to slice the pie a little thinner.
Boulder County, in particular, was very aware of what was needed for Broomfield to become its own county and to set up its own tax base.
Some departments in the counties have been very forthcoming. In others, I think it's been a struggle. It's been a real struggle to get the information.
In terms of service provision, the other counties, I think, have been delighted, and they've been very helpful in terms of working with us about here are the kinds of services that we're asked for, here are the kinds of services that people from Broomfield ask for. So in terms of philosophically, they have been exceptionally supportive.
We started right away trying to get our ducks in a row, and we requested information from the other counties, their parcel data, and I think some of the counties didn't want to give it to us right away because they had some updating to do of their own.
Probably in the Health and Human Services, that's been the hardest because you want to protect the individual. There's certain confidentialities you want to make sure are not violated. On the other hand, we have to provide those services. We have to have that information.
I guess it all boils down to money, but you know, as far as I'm concerned, they had a mandate from the citizens of this state to make this happen. And so you do it. You find a way to get it done, and that's what we've done.
That's kind of no different than anything we've ever done, even as a city. Sometimes you get cooperation, sometimes you don't.
We had a few glitches along the way, but not necessarily of our own doing.
The transition process began to uncover new issues unforeseen by the parties involved and raise new friction with two of the counties that Broomfield was leaving. Jefferson and eventually Adams counties resisted giving up the property tax revenues they received from Broomfield and began a legal battle to try to reclaim those funds for themselves. What had been a largely cooperative process up to that point became an adversarial relationship.
The biggest surprise that I would have seen that I did see in the entire process was being sued by Jefferson County in regards to property tax.
Jefferson County is of the position that that money is collected in arrears to pay the previous year's budget, but the budget laws are very clear that you set the budget and set your levy for next year's budget.
It's apparently their true belief, which is not founded in the law, that they're entitled to property tax money collected from Broomfield after we've left their county. It's nowhere in the statutes or in the law or any interpretation of the law. And some counties understood that and others didn't.
Jefferson County took the issue down to our legislators and tried to have special legislation passed that would took our $13 million away from us. That failed. Nowhere before 1998 did they ever talk about wanting to take the $13 million from us. And of that, $11 million came from Boulder County. Only $600,000 came from Jefferson County. You could have said, by the way, back in 1998, we could have negotiated this, and then we could have planned that into our financial planning process.
And we've collected the money, and we're spending it this year, so I'll be interested to see what money they would try to get from us.
So far in the courts, by the way, Broomfield has succeeded through the trial court and the district court, but it has been appealed to the Supreme Court, so we'll see what happens.
For officials experienced in running a city government, taking on county functions uncovered a number of issues that they had never had to deal with before. County governments are required to comply with a number of state and federal mandates that cities are not required to address. The political and administrative leadership of Broomfield set out to identify and comply with these new requirements.
Understanding what the state and federal mandates are for a county was a phenomenal task.
We did miss a few things that we weren't aware of, some federal laws and some state laws that surfaced after we were on our way, but mostly in the social services area. Most of those were some mandated things that we weren't aware of, even though we had deeply researched all those.
Meeting basic subsistence needs in terms of public assistance, meeting health needs through Medicaid for people who are low income, and for meeting protection needs for children and seniors.
Having worked for the federal government, it's interesting that there are so many conflicting regulations that if you follow one regulation, you may be violating another. Sometimes it takes a lawsuit to even decide what they mean.
It has been very, very good for me to sort of go back out to a local community and find out when at the state we say, here's how it should be done, to get back out in a local community and sort of say, what in the world are they thinking of? There's no way.
Broomfield also faced directives from the state legislature to finalize its county boundaries. Under Colorado law, counties cannot annex land from other counties without voter approval. Well, like many suburban cities, its borders were very irregular, a result of annexing key development areas to prevent neighboring cities from getting them first. This would have left unincorporated enclaves that remained under their original county jurisdiction. Broomfield also needed to leave itself room for economic and population growth before achieving county status and being locked into its borders.
County boundaries were established years ago by how far a circuit rider could ride in one day. And so nowadays that doesn't hold true.
The legislature said, for efficiencies, you need to be whole as possible, and we didn't want to look like Swiss cheese. We didn't want these pockets of other counties as part of us.
One of the counties was concerned that the county of Broomfield would not become a Pac-Man county, just chewing away at the boundaries of other counties. So we put in the boundary control commission and so forth that address those concerns, similar to what the city and county of Denver has.
So we put a constitutional map in here that said we would not annex beyond this boundary, and all the counties saw it, all of them agreed to it, and we agreed that we may get out to that limit and we may not.
I believe that not only individuals but communities have to grow to a certain extent. Now, we don't want rampant growth that would outstrip our infrastructure and provide a lower level of service to our citizens.
Well, there certainly has been criticism over the years about annexing ground clear up into Weld County.
But one of the things that most of us have aspired to over time was to provide a better job base and certainly a retail base so that we can keep some of our retail sales tax dollars in the community. After we annexed Interlochen, and after Interlochen became an active development community, and with the advent of Sun, Level 3, and so forth, those technology-based companies sparked the growth of Broomfield.
And that means annexing ground that has that capability. That's around intersections, that's around major roads. If there's someone else that has it in their possession or their city limits, they can have something there that might not be particularly liked by your citizens. So it's somewhat of a control issue.
A lot of people don't know this, but we have our staff do an economic analysis, and are we going to profit long term, or are we going to have to provide subsidies that can't or won't be recovered? And in every case, it's analyzed independently.
We have made things easier for development interests. They didn't have as many governmental entities to deal with, and it was a benefit to them. There are some citizens that may benefit, but by and large, most people haven't.
But we don't want to grow ahead of ourselves. That's another reason for smart, controlled, limited growth, is that if we can't provide the services way up north, then how can we build the houses up there, and yet we keep voting on housing development? I understand some growth's inevitable, but I think we're doing a better job than we did, but we haven't paid enough attention to the heritage of the open spaces that we'll give to our children and grandchildren.
Several years ago was the time to start actively acquiring open space, and we've been successful in that since then. Well, land is certainly a commodity, and as they say, they're not making any more of it. We are fixed in our boundaries now, so I think we can scrutinize developers a little more because we have a finite amount of ground left, and we really need to have quality developments.
In the 1980s, Broomfield constructed a new municipal center to serve the needs of what was at that time just a rapidly growing suburb. The center included the offices of city government, the police department, municipal court, and the Mamie Down Eisenhower Public Library. That facility was not nearly large enough to handle the new departments that would serve county functions. The library would have to be moved into a new building to allow city offices to expand into that space. Broomfield needed a vastly larger courthouse and was required by state law to have its own jail. There was also a strict deadline. These facilities needed to be built and operational by November 15, 2001, when Broomfield County became official.
Having the time to get it all done and get it going quickly so that we would have time to complete it in time for the opening. That was probably, I would think, the biggest challenge.
Well, they went over budget, yes, according to what was planned, but I've been in corporations and I've run businesses, and I know that costs tend to go upwards, never downwards.
I think that we had the best information at the time and have had to tweak that as we went, but I think in the final analysis that we were pretty close to what we needed to do.
The financing, once we determined how that was going to be done, it just went right along. And the city is highly rated as far as economically, and that was a huge plus for us.
Construction, especially public construction projects like that, often get pushed back, and they were remarkably on time, and they showed me that it can be done.
Yeah, it was hectic, but we did it. We had a goal. We needed to be in here, ready to roll on November 15th. So everybody just pitched in, and we got things over here and up and running and ready to help the people.
We've built city buildings before. We've built a library before. We've never built a jail before. One of the most contentious things a county can do or a city can do is build a jail facility.
We took a lot of body blows on the location for our detention center.
We actually located it away from most citizens.
We did a fairly extensive review of all the possible locations, started out with about 10 possible locations in the city and county. None of them really made some of our neighbors happy in the city of Westminster or the city of Superior. Even some of the Jefferson County officials weren't very happy with that location.
For them to come up to Broomfield and complain that it's going to be a mile and a half away was kind of ridiculous when you looked at the fact that their detention center's in downtown Golden.
There were several demonstrations and protests, some of which took place here at the Civic Center at City Hall. But we felt like it was a good location for Broomfield. We also felt as though it was safe to put it out in that location. One of the things that we promised during the signing process that we would build a low-profile facility. They wouldn't have anything on the outside that made it look like a detention facility, no barbed wire or big fences. That it wouldn't be a high-rise, it'd be low profile, and that we'd have a lot of berming, and that we'd use materials on the outside of the building that made it blend in with the neighborhood. We did all those things. And since that time, we haven't received any complaints actually, for well over a year about the location of the detention center.
In addition to the challenge of building the physical infrastructure of a county, Broomfield needed a vast expansion of its human resources to staff new departments and programs. This required looking for candidates from outside the community and finding professionals who could balance their expertise with a willingness to create a different type of government than they had worked with before.
We also try to take into consideration what can we learn from the private side. What works well in the private corporation, where you have a board of directors that sets policy. They appoint the CEO, who in turn appoints the department heads.
I would say that was probably more work actually than building the facilities.
The city manager's office handled hiring all these people and making all these things, the department heads. And some of them, I believe, were targeted hires. They went out and tried to find out who the best people were, and then they went after them.
But as people got excited about Broomfield, there was a lot of discussion at national conferences, at state conferences, and I started getting phone calls from people saying, what is this really about, and is this really happening?
I first saw it when I was at an assessors conference, and they came and spoke to us at our law seminar. The law seminar talked about them becoming a city and county, and of course I think they were at that time looking for people to help them start it. I became fascinated with the idea. I thought, what a great opportunity.
But we had applications from people all across the United States. And as a matter of fact, we had people who relocated, moved their families to come to Colorado, to come to Broomfield.
Once the department heads were hired, then it was up to the department heads to begin hiring the people that they work with.
We were able to attract some of the best of the counties around us. And I was pretty forthright with some of the other county clerks who I've known for years and have had the opportunity to work with. I told them, I said, there's no way I can open the doors in my operation without experienced, skilled people. And I would just ask them, where do you think I'm going to get skilled, experienced people? And they realized that I was going to come pirating their staff at some point.
And it was the epitome of on-the-job training. Because of the whole planning process, we didn't have time to train because of the transition process.
We had hoped to have staff on much earlier because we brought on most of the staff just shortly before we sort of opened the doors, and they were trying to get cases transferred through the court and go to staffings, and that was a very difficult time.
It's just very hard to put new people into the system, and sometimes that's disruptive because we want the city to function as efficiently and as cost-effective as possible.
And the fact that we have not lost anybody during this incredibly difficult time, I think speaks a lot not only for the team, but for what Broomfield affords us.
What was difficult is we were creating a whole new system. So it was difficult sometimes for the professionals to leave behind, 18, 20, 5 years of experience doing things differently.
The only way you can really understand what people do is to get them in the same room and ask them what they do. And this workflow process is important because I was unfamiliar with how the city ran. And I really enjoyed the casual atmosphere of meeting with a roundtable discussion, to bounce questions off of one another, to help inform the city council, who are very familiar with city operation, what county is all about.
So many of the people who have come because it's something new and they have an opportunity to do it differently.
I've always had ideas how building permits can integrate, how the clerk and recorder's activities can integrate, and always wanted to do them. And we tried in a small county with limited funding to do that, but we weren't always successful. Unfortunately, working together is something easy to say and harder to do.
When creating the constitutional amendment that was approved by Colorado voters, Broomfield's political and administrative leadership decided on a radical shift in philosophy for a number of county offices. They determined to create a leadership structure unlike any other county government in the state. It was a decision that proved to be perhaps the most controversial in the transition process.
One of the problems that the traditional counties have had over the years is a multitude of elective offices for not just the policymakers, such as county commissioners, but for positions such as treasurer, assessor, sheriff, coroner. We said, well, if we're going to use the council manager model, form of government, then obviously the policymakers most definitely should be elected, city council members and our mayor and so forth. But the technical people, the technical positions should be appointed by the manager.
When we put it on the ballot in 1998, we said this is what we're going to look like. At least allow us to jumpstart on November 15, 2001, and give us a year or two to see how well we're operating. And if we're operating with the efficiencies that we expect, then allow it to proceed.
I think the ones that most counties have agreed are elected should remain elected. Period. And the reality has come to pass in Broomfield. I can't vote for a sheriff like you can in Boulder or Adams. Can't vote for a treasurer, can't vote for a clerk and recorder, etc. I don't think that's right to take away the vote of the people.
You know, we could have gone with the old style, and we said, well, what we've been hearing from our county cohorts is, well, don't necessarily do that. I mean, it gets awfully cumbersome when you have all this multitude of elected positions versus the policymakers.
If a sheriff is not real happy with something that's happening in his county or her county, what they do is they go back and ask the county commissioners, and a lot of times there's friction about funding.
To have people who are trained in a profession be appointed into positions, I think gives the staff who are doing the work every day a lot more confidence in somebody at the top who's making decisions, understands what they're doing.
For me, a clerk and recorder, a sheriff who we hired off the street, we've totally checked their credentials. We know what they bring. We know the job skills. We know the salary that we can offer them. We know that they've risen through the ranks in their careers. Anybody can get elected.
It's a popularity contest, and the expertise doesn't necessarily come with it.
Would have been awful having to first run for office and not being able to focus on the ramping up as we've spent the last year getting prepared to become a county. People are campaigning already for next year, raising money. So we don't have that interference with our day-to-day tasks.
What if the people want that individual to be their sheriff? And then the people in that community could decide to fund his training so that he would be up to speed. But if that was their choice, what business is it of the bureaucrats? If I didn't like my Boulder County assessor, every 4 years I can vote him out or her out. So I think they have an incentive to perform when they have to answer to the voters.
I was an elected official for 14 years, and I was very accountable to the public. But sometimes the willingness to work together is not there in an elected situation. Commissioners, I know, are very frustrated because they can't call the shots.
The city manager has been here for many years, but that kind of consistency in terms of vision, mission, values, I think is really important as a foundation when you build a new county.
I personally feel that there is too much power in that one office, and I haven't seen any sign of that being abused at this point in time. But I continue to be greatly concerned that it will be abused at some point in the future.
The manager could come up with the organizational structure, an organizational diagram and plan, and review that with the mayor and city council and get their input, and then have public hearings and get the community's input as to, how does this look?
Basically, the city and county of Broomfield staff and council all basically can work as a team, and we can kind of get away from personalities.
I think it's important as we're doing county services to really have the city manager or someone in charge who doesn't have a political agenda, if you will.
The city council is barred from influencing the actions or the hiring policies of the city manager by our city charter.
If somebody says they want to have an elected sheriff, or if they want an elected assessor or an auditor, they can walk the streets and get it on a ballot without the city council.
I would like to see not necessarily a vote for the position, but a vote to allow retention of the position.
And I don't see what's wrong with that, putting it to a vote. And then if the people would rather have them appointed, I can live with that.
59, 12 o'clock. So long, Boulder.
I was here at 6 o'clock in the morning along with several other staff members because every newscaster, CNN was here, and through Channel 2 and Channel 9, Channel 4, you name them, they were all here. And we were giving interviews as the dawn rose on the new city and county, and the first marriage license came through. And they had been waiting to get their marriage license to get it in the city and county. I went over to the vehicle registration. There were people in line wanting to get their first Broomfield tags.
Long story, but I had to get it renewed, and it's a Broomfield driver's license. It's issued by Broomfield County.
Cool. For most people in the city and county of Broomfield, it was life as usual. There was no major life-changing significance unless you needed some services.
So we've had many people who actually put off applying for assistance that they might have needed, food stamps, Medicaid, until Broomfield actually was a county. They wanted to come to their own county. And they arrived the first day. They were here at 7 o'clock in the morning on November 15th.
I'm happy to report we have officially opened all of these facilities and have on board today the qualified staff to carry out our duties as a city and county.
After the citizens of Colorado in 1998 voted to change our Constitution to allow a 64th county, I created a governor's task force to assist the state and Broomfield in making this smooth transition. I'm pleased to report that we worked well together in tackling the complicated issues associated with such areas as human services, state mandates, and cost sharing.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Initially we thought, well, giving ourselves a pretty good lead time, but I'll tell you, it got pretty close to whether or not we really wanted it. We were going to get it all done in honor, right? Down to the point where we were going to have enough chairs in the auditorium.
Mayor, congratulations on behalf of the governor once again. This, I guess it was this morning, I was driving up I-25 toward Fort Collins, and what caught my eye off the side of the highway but a sign that said Broomfield City and County Limits. So.
I want to thank you for your vision and excellent leadership.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
That's great.
We did it.
Thank you very much.
And I'd like to thank our honored guests, our city council, and especially the citizens of Colorado and Broomfield for supporting this effort. This has been teamwork at its best, a cooperative effort by many, including all of you. And to use the words of my favorite.
On November 15, 2001, the city of Broomfield became Colorado's first new county since the city and county of Denver in 1902. It was an historic event for the state of Colorado and an opportunity for the citizens of Broomfield to come together after living as a city in 4 different counties. For Broomfield, identifying the reasons to become a county wasn't nearly as hard as the process it would take to become one. Once the transition was over and Broomfield began operating as a county in November 2001, it was now time to put into practice the concepts that had developed over the past 3 years. Both existing city departments and new county departments had to begin delivering on the promises that had been made to Broomfield citizens. One of the departments that took on a greatly expanded role was the Clerk and Recorder's Office.
We're essentially the face of county government. At some time during the year, every citizen is going to come in contact with the Clerk and Recorder's Office, buying or selling property. We do marriage licenses, the voter registration and election. The motor vehicle office, absolutely. It's the highest public volume contact office of any in the organization, either through registering a vehicle, renewing the registration on it, buying or selling a vehicle. We talked a lot with the other county clerks in the 4 predecessor counties and got a lot of great advice from them and some good recommendations. But they were all kind of in the same boat I was. They had never even thought about building their own county. So it was a lot of creation on the fly.
You know, in the past, Boulder County had those things you punch, the punch cards, and then Adams County had where you could actually mail them in, but Boulder County wouldn't, and so we'd had part of the city doing this and part of the city doing that, and now everybody's doing the same thing, which I think they like.
We then began our project of collecting and scrubbing the records, voter records from the other 4 counties. We have spent essentially the biggest part of the last 5 weeks, myself and pretty much all of the staff has been involved in this one way or another, in going through 14,000 addresses and verifying the accuracy of those addresses. Generally speaking, with a bulk mailing, they can expect anywhere from 75 to 90% accuracy on a caste certification. Ours was 99.4% accurate.
They've ordered a bunch of new voting machines, and they're handling the voting and the tabulation themselves for the first time. But I suspect the next presidential election will be a lot more turnout and a lot more work for the Clerk and Recorder's Office.
Providing human services and safeguarding public health are among the most important functions of county government. For years, Broomfield's residents, most in need of those services, struggled to obtain them, and many went without. Broomfield now had to figure out how to create a social services infrastructure from scratch and begin delivering on its promise to better serve the community's needs. It chose to collect a number of varied programs into one streamlined organization.
Actually, I am on loan from the Colorado State Department of Human Services, and my position there is Managing Director. And the new City and County of Broomfield and the State Executive Director made an agreement to loan me to help set up the new Human Services Department. This is a department that is different than in most counties in Colorado, in that we have human services, which in many counties is called social services, and lots of times people think of those as the welfare programs. In addition to that, then we have added the one-stop workforce center. We also have included public health, and in most other counties, public health is a separate agency.
Health programs and human services programs are quite often related because the same people are involved in both programs. We had to try to build a health department from scratch in half the time frame that we provided for other programs.
They had kind of expected that Boulder County would take care of a lot of those services, but that contract fell through.
In most county human services, the counties end up putting in about 20% of local tax money, and then the state reimburses us for services provided. You can't create a new department, a new building, new computers, if you're not going to take a piece of a building in Boulder and a piece of a building in Jefferson. So those things had not been factored in real well. So it was difficult in terms of negotiating some transition funding from the state because we're phasing in hiring staff as we need them, and we are getting reimbursement that we expect, as other counties get, from the state agencies. So we are actually spending a little less than the 20% county money that we would expect to spend. We started doing the process in terms of trying to figure out, for example, who were the individuals receiving services in 4 other counties, and working with perhaps 25 different state systems. It was very difficult to get the data about who was in and who was out of Broomfield, who did receive services, who didn't receive services.
They really couldn't tell us, but they had an estimated number. And did we underestimate? Yeah, based on the data that was given to us. But I think if you were to go look at other places, if they were able to centralize more, that they would have more people utilizing the services.
That's probably the place that we have to work the hardest. We really do, because it's an emotional place. People's lives are affected, and we want to give as little disruption to that as possible.
To have been trying to develop relationships with people, understand how the system worked at the same time we were doing transition would have been, I think, almost impossible. If, for example, counties had said, we're going to close all of our cases, and then people have to reapply, there conceivably could have been sort of a gap in benefits. We have about 1,000 cases currently of people receiving public assistance. And we're finding that there have been families who've been struggling and have issues, and many of them just need somebody to sort of help figure out where do we go next. Certainly when you look at some of the human service programs, the focus is on how do we meet the requirements that the federal government has, or how do we meet the requirements the state government has, or how do we spend the money the way we're supposed to, or how do we provide the services so we can put the check marks in the form. And so often what systems do is they look at what is the one problem, let's fix it, and then lo and behold they're surprised when 2 weeks later same family comes back with a different problem.
That's the problem with human services in most of the counties that I've seen, is somebody gets into the system, they don't have a way out.
Because there is still a lot of, well, this is the way it's always done. But we are a new county, and we have this wonderful opportunity that people should not lose sight of about, but it always hasn't been done here because it wasn't done here. We have talked about having what we call a generalist worker, so they see the same person, and the same person sort of helps them navigate through the system. In many counties, a family can see as many as 6 to 8 different people depending on the variety of services they need. And most counties don't focus on prevention because they're so busy doing the day-to-day stuff. When we started in Broomfield, there were no child care slots for infants and toddlers. So if you had a child under the age of 3, you had to go looking. And we have started a program where we are trying to increase sort of the supply.
And I know that the elderly programs have grown significantly also since the county started offering services, because elders don't typically want to travel great distances for things, especially when you have poor weather.
If you bring the accesses, people will come. And I think that's a model other counties ought to look at.
We have had a large influx of individuals, for example, coming to the nutrition programs or to the asking about immunization just because it's close.
Now, most of Broomfield is within maybe a 10-15 minute drive. Your neighbor might be, acquiescent to drop you off on their way somewhere, or you could catch a bus.
I don't see how they benefit the ordinary citizen. There's a small percentage of the citizen, perhaps some of those on welfare, that get some benefit from the offices being a little bit closer. But I don't know how much they really need to go into those offices anyhow.
It's up to also the person to seek the service that they need or to ask the questions. We're obviously not mind readers. If you have a need, you need to be vocal about it.
We ought to take the data and share it with Governor Owens and to the other counties and say, are you guys really sure that you're serving all your residents? Do you really know? This is what we found. If you have small, localized governments, you can serve the people better.
We have had just a tremendous group of citizens who've been involved and wanting to participate. When we talked about local government, they want to make this their own. I mean, this is their department. It's not my department. It's not even the city's department.
We're bursting at the seams over there. It's a wonderful location, just an ideal location. But I'm seeing that within a couple years we will be having to relocate if we want to keep all those services consolidated in one building, which is a great idea, and it's working good so far. But I do see the need to get a larger facility.
One of the foremost problems of being split among 4 different counties was the strain it put on Broomfield's police force. The jurisdictional mess of 4 counties created problems for its officers and took them off the street for an inordinate amount of time. However, the transition offered the opportunity to unify the traditional role of the police force with the new detention and court functions Broomfield was assuming.
For all of the departments that existed prior to becoming a city and county, this change benefited the police department more than almost any other department. In Broomfield County, there is no sheriff's department. It's just the Broomfield Police Department for all law enforcement services, which again is more efficient because you don't have to set up 2 different offices. You have just one agency. It's more streamlined. Decision-making becomes a lot easier and a lot faster. We have one district attorney's office to deal with. We have our own jail, which is located within the city and county limits. And it's pretty simple to develop procedures, and it's pretty simple to understand how to file cases and how to make arrests and where to lodge prisoners. And it's a difficult job anyway, being a police officer, and it's only made more difficult if you have to do things differently depending on where you made the arrest. We could set up a procedure that we call field booking, so that when an officer needs to make an arrest in the field, what he does is first calls into the detention center and asks that they send a transport van out to his location. Once the transport van arrives, they take custody of the suspect and they transport the suspect back to the detention facility for the booking paperwork. The officer completes a short arrest report in the field on a laptop computer that we have installed in all the cars, and then electronically sends that information back to the detention center. Typically, in the old days, they would have to put the suspect in the back of the car. They would then drive the suspect down to police headquarters, do the booking paperwork there, and then drive to the county jail. Altogether, the officer would be out of his beat for at least 3 hours, maybe longer. Now the officer never leaves the beat, and they're probably out of service for a total of about 30 minutes. It seems to be like we put together a much neater package when we present the cases for filings or when our officers go to court. So overall, it's been a very good program, but there's been a lot of headaches getting to this point.
Our police had started a mobile project back in, I believe, 1997, which was before I began work here, where they had cellular digital packet data modems in the cars, which are basically same thing as a computer modem, but it goes out on a radio link. We weren't really achieving the employee efficiency benefits because the application ran so slowly in the cars. And so we built a network initially of 8 towers here in Broomfield. This summer we're actually on a project to overbuild that with probably another 10 towers are going to go in. We actually run right now for the police cars a hybrid system where they have 2 network connections. They have the old AT&T wireless cellular product, and they have an 802.11b antenna we put on in addition, and it will automatically shift gears between the 2 network systems, where if they're in range of one of our towers and they can run at 11 million bits per second, they'll run on that network. If they're out of range of one of our towers, and we cover probably 70-75% of the city, but a device like this is about $1,200. So they're quite inexpensive, and actually the largest cost turns out to be putting up your towers and running antenna cable up the towers and mounting things up on high places where they can see things that they need to see.
Seconds count, and when you're losing minutes, it's not safe. So when we designed the new police headquarters building, we designed a communication center that was large enough with the right kind of equipment in it so that we could do a joint city and county public safety communication center with us and the fire department. So when a 911 call comes in to the Broomfield Police Communication Center, if it's a police-related call, within seconds we can dispatch police officers. If it's a fire-related call, within seconds we can dispatch the fire department, because it all comes into the same point.
Broomfield's police not only face the challenge of modernizing the department, but expanding their force significantly to operate the new county jail it was required to build. This was one area where there was little experience to draw from and much to learn.
I've been a police officer for a long time, all of it as a municipal police officer. I've never worked either in a detention facility or spent much time in them other than to drop prisoners off or to go up and interview suspects. Because we were spread out over 4 different counties, we had small groups of inmates in each of the facilities because we built a fairly large facility. It's about 50,000 square feet. It's a $13.9 million facility. Right now, we have 88 beds available, and it can be easily expanded up to about 200. We chose somebody who had been a member of the police department for a long time to be our jail commander. So now all we had to do is sort of train him to become a pretty good jail manager. We promoted 8 sergeants from our existing ranks to supervise out there. So we had to do a lot of recruiting, and we recruited for about 2 years in order to find 30 new positions. But we received over 200 applications to work on our facility, partly because it's brand new, partly because our pay scale is quite good, and partly because it was something that a lot of people wanted to be a part of. We kind of farmed them out for a couple of months to some of the surrounding county jails, and they worked side by side in those detention facilities with experienced officers. And we probably couldn't have done it as well without their help. A little more than half who had previous experience in county facilities, and then half who were brand new. And with that kind of a mix, you kind of have a lot of people who are learning and a lot of people who have already been through it, and they learn from each other.
We can do video advisement and video arraignments, so it's safer for the community because the defendant remains in a secured environment.
They put the prisoners in front of a TV monitor with a camera, and I talked to those prisoners that had been arrested the night before, advised them of their charges, the bond amount, and we have some discussion regarding whether they're going to be released or not and scheduling of further proceedings. The fact that we can talk to those prisoners every day over our audio-visual system is quite useful and beneficial both to the police department as well as the courts.
The final piece of the new integrated law enforcement system was the creation of county and district courts to augment the existing municipal court. Not only would they need to build a brand new courthouse to handle new judges and court staff, but the courts would be required to integrate 3 levels of court functions with the technological systems of the police and detention center.
So we located the police headquarters facility and the courthouse adjacent to each other. We have a common wall. Now our officers only have to walk from police headquarters across the hall over to the courthouse to file cases with one DA, one procedure. So it made sense right from the beginning, from the police department standpoint, that we could not only do things more efficiently, but we could probably save an awful lot of time in training and attending court, in driving to file cases and driving to attend court.
Knowing a lot of the people, you know, you just can develop some good relationships and communicate much better.
The 17th Judicial District, they accepted Broomfield, they accepted the responsibility.
After having looked at Boulder and Weld County and entertaining some various fits, philosophy and ideology regarding the justice system, we opted to join the 17th.
They even said we'll do it without an extra judge. Well, I think probably the extra judge is coming, but at the same time, Adams County has been very receptive to accepting Broomfield and working with us.
It wasn't necessarily implementing how Adams, Boulder, and Weld counties had done things in the past. More importantly, it was taking what they had done well in the past and bringing it to our table and filling in the gaps with what we thought was possible. Obviously, county court operates on a full-time basis. District court is approximately 2 days a week right now. And then municipal court functions about 1 day a week.
Municipal court handles traffic matters, misdemeanor ordinance violations, anything that's covered under our municipal code. Where county court handles, they do all DUIs, civil claims. If the claim is higher, it goes to district court. Any criminal felony type filings are in district court.
It was a 2-year planning process. We've been able to implement it for about 6 months. So within our courthouse, we have the probation department, we have the DAs, which is the district attorney, and then of course the court staff. The difficulty in starting from scratch was assessing what the particular caseloads were going to be, therefore what the workload impact was going to be. We've been right on the mark, other than in juvenile delinquency, which are kids that it's a higher level of problems. That caseload is running a little bit higher than we anticipated, as is the criminal court running a little bit higher. That's the need to expand district court to 2 days rather than to 1 day. The capability to utilize technology has been a huge asset because we didn't have a backlog of cases that needed to be brought up to the 20th century. What separates Broomfield is that we were designed and built with that technology in mind. Our district judge, Harlan Bachman, he has been a real leader here in Broomfield, taking us into this new technological era. Rather than spending taxpayers' money to fly defendants and or witnesses to our facility for court proceedings, we can hook up via the telephone lines.
We have the capability through our audiovisual system to connect remotely with any number of places, actually worldwide. I have the ability when I'm on the system to change the camera view so that I can see different things in the courtroom and change the perspective, either panning out or panning back in. We're looking at the audio-visual room in the Adams County Courthouse about 25 miles away, so I can talk to the other judges there, or they can talk to me, or we can conduct conference calls, or even do actual cases over the audio-visual system.
In cases of victims, especially children, we have the capability to have off-site locations to where they are in a secured, protected, safe environment in the police department, providing testimony in the courtrooms so as not to expose them further to the court process. We have in the courtroom, it's called FDR, which is a type of real-time recording. The judges will have the capability to touch screen, it's called a plasma screen, on the bench to immediately review whether it was something said a half hour ago or moments ago while the proceeding is continuing.
Where we used to have all of the documents inside of a manila folder and available for use, rather than doing that now, rather than building these paper files, we're simply doing this by the use of the computer. We take those documents, we scan them into our scanners, and then images of those documents reside in our database then for later use. And I can log into different cases by going through the appropriate procedures, call up different images, and work with those pleadings in a case that have been filed. We're going to be the first court in Colorado that eventually is going to be totally paperless and not maintain any of the paper files, and we are the test site for this and several other unique projects going on with the State Judicial Department.
The only way you're really going to achieve this is if you have a single software system for all those courts. And the state has a system called ICON that's run by State Judicial, an in-house developed system that almost all the county courts and all the district courts in the state are on. They did not have any municipal courts on that system at all.
All of our staff is cross-trained in the disciplines of municipal, county, and district court functions.
Some counties have tried to do that, and it has been an abysmal failure because the city folks wouldn't let the county folks open their mail, or the city folks wouldn't take the reception duties for the district people.
We're still working on some of the kinks. You know, and of course, most of us hadn't had any exposure to it because they were just putting the final touches on everything as we were moving in. But there's nothing like just having that first customer that files something and just having to figure it out.
The decision to create a system of highly interconnected government functions depended heavily on the utilization of technology. Since there were few examples of such integration, Broomfield had to create a blueprint of its own. Complicating the mission was the need to seamlessly transfer records from the 4 existing counties into the new system.
At times it felt like the computerization was the biggest challenge, but you had to step back and think, gee, what if we didn't have that computerization? It would have been much more monumental.
Here we've got a team of people that are willing to put it together. We've got an IT manager who sees the big picture and realizes that his entire role is to service and implement this interaction between departments.
And we had about 12 new county departments that each had a vertical software application they needed to support them. Some of them were very, very specific. And we didn't have any of those applications before.
having the concept of technology is very different than having the infrastructure that has been developed that can house it.
You got to hire the right folks. You got to take time to hire. You don't want somebody who's going to say, that's not my job. You want somebody to say, how can we make it better?
We were able to bring in people who were inclined to orient themselves towards a higher technological level of trying to coordinate things.
The training is a real challenge because you're right, there are a lot of people that are not aware of what we have.
We had people who just had only sort of been trained the very basics on the thing and were doing things in very inefficient ways. We now have a full-time training coordinator on my staff who does nothing but technology training.
Without that, you're not going to have an innovative system. You're going to have your typical government workers, and that's definitely what we don't want to have here.
Being one of the first to do this, we also had, experienced more problems probably than somebody would who was starting the program up today.
For us, it was a nightmare. Yeah, obviously, we started working on this and procured the base software systems we were going to use very early in the process. And that was kind of one of my missions early on, was to try and create some urgency about buying things like software products that we weren't really going to need in a production mode for a year and a half.
The problem for some of the older counties is that they've already invested time and money into what they're doing, and they can't start from scratch like we could. We are able to start fresh, so we were able to buy new technology. We were able to transfer records from other agencies.
One of our real challenges has been, how do you get every department down at the state to talk to our computers?
Just in our department, we hook into, I think it's 29 different information systems.
There's a great deal of interface between each of the county departments and the state. And so you have to have your application set so we know where the data is coming from and going to, and then we go at the state end and how do we ship the data back and forth where we need to.
November 15th, 2001, we would start recording any real estate transaction that took place in Broomfield. But how about November 14th? Where do you go to find that document or anything in the years past?
We had 4 predecessor counties here, and each of them had different software systems and different ways of using those software systems.
One of the problems we had is the data that we had from the previous counties was anywhere from 6 months to 2 years out of date. We'd always have to double and triple check our information because it would change from the time we got it to when we actually did some title research and that sort of thing.
And so we needed to standardize those kind of things as we imported them and put them into one database so we could have consistent data that meant the same thing.
Went down a different road at that point and got remote access to the 4 other counties, to their records. Any record they have computerized, we have access to remotely here in the office.
Technology is not always what people say it's going to be. It doesn't always mean it's going to be better or faster or anything else. And so over the last 4 or 5 years that we've had this paperless system, we've had to work out a lot of bugs.
And really evaluating the data and coming up with a combination that really pulls the best out of each one of those and puts together something that's efficient, effective, and takes the good pieces out of each one of those.
It did save us from some adversity.
Without computerization, I don't know. I probably wouldn't have the time to sit here and talk to you. We'd still be working on it.
Creating the technological basis for the new county's government was only one piece of the puzzle. Early in the transition process, Broomfield's leadership decided that the physical and cultural barriers between county departments must be eliminated for the public to be better served. The idea was to make it as convenient as possible for taxpayers to obtain what they needed from county employees.
In the city and county of Broomfield, we have one MIS system. All systems talk to each other.
We have told the top administration in the city of Broomfield to filter down that information to all the employees, that everybody works together. There's no empire building.
When a citizen walks in the door, the basic idea is we can take care of their needs. They don't need to go from one office to another office to get the kinds of things they need from county government.
What the Central Records Office is essentially the point position for the recording function of the Clerk and Recorder's Office, the assessor, the treasurer, and vital statistics.
We're going to have sort of a one-stop shop for all those services.
I think early on we had big expectations that everything would just go smooth as silk. And that didn't happen.
And there's a million things you'd like to change when you're in a position like mine, and there's a million things you'd like to redo but you never have the opportunity.
It's much easier to take something from nothing and create than it is to take something and have to modify.
You got to get everybody in the same room, and you got to get them talking, and you got to get them to talk about what processes they're doing and how can we better the process.
It was taking what they had done well in the past and bringing it to our table and filling in the gaps with what we thought was possible.
Once that realization hit home, they started seeing how the integration is going to work better and better. And I'm sure we'll find other ways to integrate.
We are receiving a document today. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, that document will be in the mail going back to the recording party. It's less than 24-hour turnaround on recorded documents. There's no other county in the state that touches that. We've just been given the opportunity to do it the way it should be done.
Broomfield's new philosophy of combining technology with a streamlined organizational structure is found in the departments that handle property records. Where most counties have separated the various departments that access this information, the goal was to use technology to centralize the data and to prevent taxpayers from getting the runaround found in traditional government offices.
The Land Records Workflow Group, it encompasses the building, planning, engineering, clerk and recorder, information technology, treasurer, revenue manager, utility billing, all the folks that touch the process from start to finish. And that means from the day the guy walks in and wants to do a development until the day he pays taxes on it. But the integration that we're going to be putting together between the clerk's office, the assessor, and the treasurer is very unique. In a typical county, we've got a treasurer function and a public trustee function. Here we have what we call a revenue manager. The revenue manager works under the finance department and manages all the revenues that comes in.
There are other counties that have appointed treasurers. However, there's no other counties that handle the broad spectrum of billing and collection that my office will handle.
We have a great set of information technology folks that are working closely with another group, Farragut Systems Incorporated, to put together the existing softwares to integrate them into one database. We have the opportunity here to integrate not only city operations but county operations. GIS is actually Geographic Information Systems, and what that is tying data to maps. It enhances the ability for anyone to visualize data. You can look at property values, you can look at property tax districts, you can look at where all the single-family residences are in relationship to the vacant land, and look for problems rather than going through a ream of paper where you'd never find your problem. Now, say I was looking for uniformity in those taxing areas. I'm going to blow this up. What that's going to do now is color all of those properties with a coding that says what the values are. If I see a value color that doesn't look appropriate, then I can go in and find out what's going on. Could be park, it could be exempt, but this allows me to evaluate my data on a visual outlook. You can get very detailed when you go into an operation like this. Now, I want to make sure that my values are fair, equitable, and so I can zoom into an area here to make sure that what I'm doing is fairly assessing the property. So what I'm going to do here is highlight all of my $40,000 to $80,000 properties to see what they look like. Okay, there they are. There's a white one. What's going on with this one? And I can identify it. Now I have a piece that identifies exactly what that is. So this is a tool that is invaluable in all aspects of city and county government. Have you got an area that's zoned improperly? Have you got one parcel that doesn't have the correct zoning? You can do queries and different things about surrounding parcels. This will be a web-based application that will be internal initially, and then we're going to put this out to the public. We're going to have kiosks available out in the public area, but of course if somebody's really struggling or they're uncomfortable with it, we'll also have people there to help them.
And they can locate a property by its address or by its physical location, or a reception number if they happen to have a deed. The assessor is building her database from the deeds that came in, and that information from the landowners.
Typically, the assessor's office would re-enter data into the database based on what documents were recorded. The data comes in, and each department will add to, add on, and enhance that data and share it. This will save us, two weeks to a month processing time when the public is anxious to see. You know, we want up to the minute. We want to be current.
The police department crime data, we're now in the process of mapping that so that we can query on different types of crime, amounts of crime over any period of time. We're looking at setting up a fee schedule to charge certain fees for giving out this information to the private sector so that they can use it, though. It's a big benefit to them, so they don't have to recreate it.
We work for the people, and all of this enables them to have more information, more quickly, and utilize that information. It's one centralized database that serves the citizens, no duplication of effort, and cooperation amongst departments that sometimes have a lot of difficulty cooperating.
Unlike traditional counties, which often are far-flung and encompass several communities, Broomfield is still a small enough town to maintain a sense of community that most counties can't emulate. Just bringing government closer to the residents would be inadequate if personal contact with the city's officials couldn't be maintained.
For the most part, people won't see a difference in the day-to-day except for the little pieces that they need, and then they'll be pleased.
The main aspect of that is what do we hear from our citizens? How well is it being received? I'm hearing pretty good things. They really like the idea of being able to stay in Broomfield when they get the license for their vehicles and trucks and what have you.
When I did have to get my license plates redone this year, I drove over to the emissions place, got my emissions, went over to get my license plates. I had the whole thing done in 20 minutes. The business community has supported this because of the efficiencies of not having to go to other counties because they had to travel to Greeley. They had to travel to, and they travel more often than generally our residents do.
I have never once had to go to a Boulder County office to obtain services. Therefore, it's of no benefit to me that the offices are, whether they're here or in Boulder County.
I don't know why anybody wouldn't want to have the services here.
When you talk to people about it, they say it will be so nice to have it all in one spot, but I don't know if they realized what they were getting into before.
There was a gentleman here the other day. He was a Broomfield citizen. He's also a professional title searcher. He goes, "I hope you screw up my record so I can come back again tomorrow." I mean, that's just how friendly the staff is, and they all, and he meant it. He wanted to come back again. He hoped we let him down. We didn't screw it up. We got it right.
I just went to my own county. You know, I ended up, because we had a couple of issues, but standing in 3 different lines on 3 different floors of a county courthouse, and people would say, well, we'll look at their computer. And I said, well, I just talked with so-and-so. They had no idea who the person on the other floor was.
One of our philosophies is think Mayberry. Now, the whole idea behind that is keep that small town atmosphere. Keep the personal touch there. Don't lose sight the fact that there is a citizen, a taxpayer, a human being at the other end of that transaction.
We all try to kind of go above and beyond for everybody, and people are somewhat surprised sometimes.
The citizens of Broomfield, I think they expect it, and I think that they deserve it. They've come a long ways. They've worked hard to get us to this point.
A lot of the times the contact a citizen has with our government may be the only contact that citizen ever has with us. And how well that's handled and how well that citizen is treated really determines what they're going to think about the whole organization.
When you have a customer who walks up to your desk and they got a smile on their face and they're glad you're here, well, it's easy to be glad they're there.
I don't like the jargon being used. We're not customers, we own the joint. Government belongs to the people, not the other way around. And people who are in government needs to be constantly reminded of this.
If we are going down the wrong track, tell us now, because we should be able to change direction.
Their voice was so small within the 4 counties that they were involved in. I think that the Broomfield residents will be pleasantly surprised at how quickly their voices are heard within this group.
For years, taxation had been a source of conflict for Broomfield residents and the counties that collected them. Not only was the level of taxation an issue, but so was the long-standing belief the money didn't come back to Broomfield through better services and public works. Consolidation would simplify tax collection and keep the money in Broomfield, but it didn't end the debate about whether taxes could actually be reduced. as many had hoped.
I truly expect a lowering of property taxes in the next year or two. Our council is very serious, but you can't lower the mill levy until you're up and running and see actually how it operates.
It was primarily Adams and Jefferson where the mill levy cuts were very large. Taxes went down. Our assessments that we used for collecting taxes this year were the assessments established by Boulder County.
We're pretty fortunate. Our mill levy's at 17, Boulder County's at 28. I haven't heard a lot of people complaining about their valuations because I don't think many people would have a problem selling their house for what the evaluation was for.
If I look at my property taxes this year, this year, compared to last year when I was in Boulder County, I am paying higher property taxes, not lower. Yes, they did lower the mill levy rate, but with the higher assessed valuation, you end up with no gain.
You know, we understand what the bottom line is, how much tax we pay, but we don't get involved in the process of where that came from. We will rely on educating them as to how much they'll be impacted by the other special districts that will impose a levy, which may go up or may not go down, but their valuation has gone up, and so consequently the dollars go up.
It's the end results. How many dollars do you pay out? And I have been very surprised that there's been very little done to hold them accountable to that fact.
We just got the mall money starting to come in, and there's additional retail development around the mall that's still going to be coming online. So we went from zero out there in sales tax to $384 million. That will also come back to our community. And then eventually I see the sales tax of 7.85% eventually dropping also to be more competitive. You know, malls get old, and we need to be prepared for the eventuality that those revenues out there will decrease.
Capital funds are really driven by sales dollars, and we never had a lot of that before. And now we're able to build some facilities that residents have wanted for a long time without raising taxes, without going to the voters for a bond.
The property tax money goes to fund your schools, goes to fund your rec centers, goes to fund your parks, goes to fund your police.
Now it stays in Broomfield, with the added benefit of having your elected officials going through the public process to find the needs of our community.
Our local citizens will decide where their taxes go and how they're spent. We won't send them off to other places and have others decide where our monies and where our services come from.
Throughout most of its history, Broomfield was a bedroom community with little economic or retail base of its own. The property and sales taxes it did generate often were barely sufficient to serve city needs and maintain the town's infrastructure. The 1990s, though, saw a convergence of a rapidly growing economy with the fruits of Broomfield's efforts to acquire commercial and retail development to supplement its residential growth. These factors became a key to the feasibility of creating the new county without placing extra burdens on taxpayers.
Economically, we're in the strongest position we have ever been in, and I think the timing is perfect for this community to do this.
We had been very conservative in our planning and our forecasts, and we still haven't, as far as sales tax revenue, dropped below our conservative projections.
It was certainly the city council and mayor setting a proper business atmosphere such that when major companies such as Sun and Level 3 and others came to the community, they were welcomed.
We're not totally dependent on that. We do have the retail now with the Flatiron Crossing gives us the sales tax base that we never had in it.
We were able to capture our own retail dollars, which tremendously helped the effort as far as how the financial package was going to look in the long run.
We have an outstanding staff that looks at to see that the proposed developer meets the use, and then the other piece of that is that is it going to be good for Broomfield in general Is it going to provide a tax base?
It's very limited there in Boulder what they can do, and prices are high. So I think that a lot of those businesses just naturally will move to Broomfield. We've got the whole northeast corner of the city yet that hasn't been done. A good portion of that's going to be commercial. So I think the economic wealth of Broomfield is really yet to be determined.
The creation of Broomfield County didn't eliminate all the divisions in the city. Many county supporters want to take the consolidation a step further with a unified school district to replace the 5 districts in the new county's boundaries. Division on that issue remains even within the groups that supported or opposed the larger question of creating Broomfield County.
Well, once people became aware of the fact that the creation of the city and county would not impact the school districts, they became a lot more sympathetic and a lot more supportive of what was going on.
That was one of the guiding reasons for the whole idea of our becoming a county in the first place, was to try to consolidate our schools. And I think a lot of people ended up voting for this within the city of Broomfield, still under a misconception that it did or would help the school situation.
If the school districts had been involved, it might have been little more difficult for us to make this happen.
People said, well, we don't want to mess up the apple cart with the school district, but we will support you if you just want to be a county.
Broomfield had made the statement, you know, if we are able to bring about one school district in the county of Broomfield, then we'll pay you back for the money that you put into the school. And probably we ought to make Broomfield a school district of its own, so that they can bring about the revenue from the property taxes.
There's actually a fair amount of support that I could conjecture within the next couple of years you'll see that come up again. A lot of money is going towards charter schools, and they don't serve, you know, the same amount of students. So whenever you start a charter school, you're taking money away from the standard public school. I think if we were to have our own school district, quite frankly, we wouldn't have the need for a charter school in Broomfield County.
It's more difficult now to consolidate the school system compared to what it was before, because primarily because not only do you have 4 counties involved, now you got 5.
Perhaps someday we might have our own, but let's get over all of this other stuff first.
In its first year of operating as a separate county, Broomfield has been obtaining feedback from its citizens to ascertain whether their experiment is successful and to identify the issues it must address in the future.
We recently had a community survey done indicating, you know, well, what did our citizens think about the transition? Were they satisfied with it? Did they have concerns? And I think the vast majority of the responses we've seen indicate that people are pretty satisfied with what's occurred with the transition. The services are there. Hopefully they're responsive.
The questions are coming more frequently now because we've had this focus on education to bring these folks up to speed about how the process is going to work.
There were some things that they needed to work on, you know, definitely, but I think by and large, a lot of things came off that maybe people were pleasantly surprised. And there was a lot of change in 6 months, more than you would probably think.
Because there's a lot more things that the city council are involved in, and it's represented by the press, the newspapers are picking up on a lot of those things.
Some people in a community don't really know how city government works, or they're not that interested in their local government.
If you're really happy about something, or really want something to happen, you're outspoken. Or if you're really a critic, you don't hear about the people who are just kind of, okay with it.
Usually if I get calls, it's not about this process. When I get calls, it'll be because there's a problem.
People have been involved in the process the whole way through it, so there's just nothing to really get too negative about.
I'd like to see a little more police presence in the neighborhood, though they're doing a fine job. I'd like to see a police station that's open at night with a desk sergeant at the desk.
I think some of the biggest issues we're obviously facing right now are transportation systems. And what's really going to happen with some of the major transportation systems in the area, such as US 36, the Broomfield interchange, Wadsworth interchange. You've got about 5 highways feeding into an archaic interchange, and what's really going to happen with all this? The state right now, having a heck of a budget crunch. The amount of dollars available for transportation system projects is really limited. We're trying to actually get some dollars from Washington for the Broomfield interchange, and have been doing some lobbying. Our mayor's been back to Washington. There are certain things traditionally that have been county funding mechanisms, if you will. Certain things have been traditionally city. Broomfield has the opportunity to go for both, and obviously we've been doing that.
With the decision to appoint a number of traditionally elected county office holders, the City Council and Mayor remain the only directly elected officials in the new government. Their role remained largely the same from their old one when serving only city needs, but they would be taking on additional responsibilities and straddling the line between being part-time City Council members and full-time county commissioners.
We will be the only home rule county. And what that means is our city manager still is our CEO, and he really runs the county.
Our people will have a higher representation than any other county in the state per capita.
How many times have you seen your county commissioner in the grocery store and had a conversation with that county commissioner? Most of them didn't even know who their county commissioners were, let alone had they ever even seen them face to face. And the beauty of what we saw here was that we see our constituents all the time.
I think our workload changed significantly once we became a city and county, and mostly it lightened because there was so much work going into that transition.
Harried almost up till the point that we were opening the doors, because we had to do all the annexations before we became the county. As we made policy decisions for Health and Human Services, for Public Health, for Board of Equalization, the kinds of things that we hadn't had to grapple with before.
Now, instead of just dealing with the traditional council role, which I consider bricks and sticks and, local ordinances, where you can park your car and, what developments can be approved. Well, now we're dealing with people's lives.
We do have additional boards that we sit on, and we have to have the portion of our city council meeting is broken up.
All of us have a day job, most of us. We work for various businesses.
Corporations who really do support civic involvement, and to the extent that mine has, it's been a big help to me, because there are times when I have to take off during the day, but I've learned to balance that.
I think that it's going to be very, very hard for somebody to give a 4-year commitment for a city council member to be part-time and only get $6,000 a year. Even if you add up our entire salaries, it's still less than the county commission gets from Montrose County, and they don't have to run a city.
We probably will not have the level of involvement that county commissioners have in other counties, where they generally choose an area and immerse themselves.
Future councils are going to have a lot more on the plate if they care to do it.
We're going to be discussing, should our charter be changed to reflect more of what other counties look like. I don't know if they're going to be implemented, but they're going to be discussed.
Broomfield's unusual background and the innovative ways it has chosen to address unifying city and county government functions is attracting interest from around the nation. In many ways, Broomfield is a case study for other cities and counties to monitor. But can Broomfield's approach be effectively applied in existing jurisdictions?
To create a new county is very rare. But I think if anybody is interested in looking at starting a city and county, they will come and look at us.
Of course, it wasn't one of those things where you could go over to the library and say, what is it that thing says new counties for dummies or something? We didn't have one of those.
I just came back from Atlanta. I went to the National League of Cities conference, and people had seen this on CNN or had seen a blurb, or when they noticed my name and badge, City and County of Broomfield, they wanted to know, what is that? And when I talked to them a little bit, they said, that's a great idea.
Actually getting a lot of questions from other cities that are within counties, because they are curious how we did it.
And I always tempered my comments with, first, it's a lot of work.
I would not be surprised within the next 10 years to see 3 or 4 municipalities try to form their own counties. I know those conversations have already been happening, because I've had them.
Broomfield's going to be a good place to look. It's almost like the experiment to see. I mean, we've had the city and county of Denver for a very long time, but they're also very, very large.
If you're in a metropolitan area with 1 million people, it's a little more difficult to educate and get feedback from those folks that are impacted by those decisions.
Kind of do this for several years, and you think that everybody else is somewhat doing the same thing, and we found out that wasn't the case at all.
County government is pretty inefficient. The way it's grown, it's just kind of become one of those Medusa things with lots of heads. And I think a lot of people, if they could just go in and change a lot of things, they would consolidate a lot of things.
Other counties and cities have done portions of what we're doing, but they haven't totally brought together like we have.
And I think things like field booking could work in other counties. And I think a lot of other counties might be interested in taking a look at that, but it would take an awful lot of cooperation.
So some of them feel like, well, gee, how do we go about doing these things? Even if we have the will and the resources to do these things, the political environment in our county is going to make it very difficult to do those things.
If you take a look at most of the counties in Colorado, this kind of a setup probably doesn't work because there are so many different municipalities within each county.
If the urban centers all remove themselves from those rural areas, that's left with the rural, small population in the rural areas needing to support the infrastructure for the majority of the land area. And that just defeats the purpose of a county, in my mind.
You know, we'll probably stumble a few times, but I'm confident that there won't be anything that we can't overcome.
There's no template for how to do this, and I'm sure we'll make some mistakes along the way, but as long as we learn from them, that's the most important thing.
I think if the community is really behind it, it can work. And if the community is not behind it, it probably won't work very well.
I'm sure a lot of entities are watching to see just, are we really going to be successful with this or not? You know, how well are we doing? And I'm sure they're watching us. So, and we don't mind at all. Come and see what we're doing. I think we're doing fine.
Broomfield continues to be unique by combining the better aspects of traditional city and county governments, melding them into one entity that seeks to reduce government's complexity while keeping services the public wants close to home. Even among those who opposed its creation, there is a desire to make the new county a success. And Broomfield's political leadership is aware that citizens may decide to alter parts of their original vision in the future. The future will undoubtedly reveal new challenges. For now, Broomfield continues to pursue a largely uncharted path that could prove to offer lessons that will help local governments in the future.
In the back of my mind, I thought, can't do that. You know, people of Colorado are not going to accept another county. But amazingly, I think the people of Colorado could see the problem.
Myself and my colleagues, I think, did not think it would happen. When it did, I can remember talking about, you know, who would be crazy enough to try to do this. And then when Broomfield talked to me and said, will you come do it? No, I sort of had to rethink that.
Looking back on that, it was certainly a highlight of my career to see that happen. It was great fun. We enjoyed every minute of it.
It's a great story, and I'm glad to have been a part of it. I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
Because we did make history. When we created the new city and county of Broomfield, we created history.
I think if someone had given us a compendium of here's all the things you have to do, and here are the pieces that are out there that nobody knows what's going to happen, I wonder if we would have been courageous enough. I suspect we would have been.